All right, good morning, everyone. This is Mike Montefusco, National Weather Service, Wakefield, Virginia. This is your weekly weather briefing for Thursday, October 3rd, 2024, on into the upcoming weekend and early next week. Let's go ahead and talk about the highlights for the weekend ahead into early next week. Mainly dry weather going to be prevailing through the upcoming weekend. We are looking for a pair of cold fronts to drop across the region in the next few days. The first will be dropping across the region later tomorrow into Friday night. That'll be a mainly dry front. The second and stronger front crosses the region late in the weekend into early next week with much cooler and drier air pushing into the region. We'll talk about that as we get into the later portions of the briefing. Some minor coastal flooding is going to continue over the next few tide cycles, or next couple of tide cycles, that will gradually start to improve as we get into the weekend, into early next week. Some river flooding on the Nottoway River at Stone Creek will gradually start to improve with our tide level, with our river levels gradually dropping down across the region. No additional river flooding is expected at this time across the region. And on the marine side, small craft advisories through this evening along the coastal waters for elevated seas. Those are going to drop off, but we do expect some additional small craft advisories late in the weekend into early next week with stronger cold front dropping across the region. Again, looking at our weather highlights, pair of fronts dropping across the region. The first drops across the region later tomorrow into Saturday morning. The second drops across the region late in the weekend into early next week. Much cooler and drier air pushes in for next work week, certainly Monday, but especially Monday night through the mid to late week period. Much cooler air and drier conditions are expected, and certainly with the last week plus that we've had, drier air is not a bad thing at this point. As we get into the severe storm and heavy rain potential, you'll notice this is empty. No complaints here. Strong to severe storms not anticipated, mainly dry weather anticipated, so heavy rainfall, severe weather not anticipated at this time through the next week or so. Looking at the daily precipitation through the next 7 days, mainly dry, a couple of showers possible with that second front across the north and then along the coastal Carolinas for the middle of next week. But for the most part, dry weather is expected across the region through the middle of next week. Taking a look at your regional forecast summary, temperatures remain near or just a little bit above average as you go through the weekend into early next week and then beyond it. You can see starting on Tuesday here, we do start to get below normal temperature-wise. Climatologically get below that value with highs generally in the upper 60s to low 70s Tuesday through the middle of next week. Low temperatures generally back into the upper 50s to even some upper 40s possible as we get into the middle of next week over inland areas for the middle of next week. So much cooler air on the horizon as you get into the middle portion of next week. On the marine side, generally quiet for wind, marine wind, fairly quiet the next few days. No big issues with respect to marine winds kicking up through the weekend. We do have that cold front that'll be dropping across the region Sunday night into Monday. So do anticipate we are going to be looking at another window of some small craft advisories Monday and especially Monday night with that cooler air pushing into the region on gusty northwesterly winds. So be ready for those small craft conditions to push into the region at that time. And certainly with respect to our elevated seas, our low pressure that's lingered offshore for much of this past week is keeping seas elevated. So between that and distant Hurricane Kirk, which poses no threat to land, that is going to head off into the to the northeast into the northern Atlantic. This system is well to the east of the Leeward Islands and poses no threat to land, but will send additional easterly swells in our direction. So those between that and our upcoming frontal passage later in the weekend into early next week, our seas are going to remain elevated. So be ready for those elevated seas to remain an issue through the middle portion of next week. As you can see, again, those wave heights going to remain elevated even as our winds remain calm next couple of days here. Those are going to remain elevated. Small craft advisories do drop off tonight, as I said, but they're going to remain elevated in the 3 to 4 foot range for our seas off the Atlantic coast tomorrow into Saturday, and then they do start to increase again once we get into Sunday night into the middle of next week. Marine forecast summary: generally east northeasterly winds today will turn around to the east southeast as we get into ahead of the next front, which crosses the region later on Sunday, and then behind that front, winds turn around to the north northwest and become gusty. Certainly Monday, but more likely Monday night and Tuesday, with that cooler, drier air pushing into the region. Our seas remain elevated, as you can see here, but get into small craft range once again later in the weekend into early next week. Tidal flooding potential, you can certainly see we remain in the minor to locally moderate in the tidal Rappahannock River and around the Bishop's Head area, but gradual improvement next few tide cycles with respect to our coastal flood thresholds. So small gradual improvement, but remaining in the nuisance range the next few days. And you can see as we push through the individual sites here, you do have some elevated, especially in the upper bay, see some elevated tides remaining as we get into the weekend and early next week. A little bit more marked improvement in the lower bay, the lower James. You can start to see we remain in nuisance flood, especially with those astronomically higher tide cycles, but gradual improvement as we get into the weekend and early next week. And on the coastal side, again, more marked improvement with those tide levels, again, remaining elevated, but getting back into more nuisance rather than minor tide levels. Rip current forecast, we were high rip risk today, generally dropping back to moderate tomorrow through the weekend. Again, those seas remain elevated in the 3 to 4 foot range as we get into the weekend. So again, be cognizant of that for those heading towards our beaches. Look for flags from guards. Make sure you're cognizant of the rip risk threat. Looking ahead to next week, enhanced probabilities for below normal temperatures for next week across the region with that cooler, drier air pushing into the region, and also enhanced probabilities for below normal precipitation as well across the region with our cooler, drier Canadian air mass pushing into the region. Temperatures generally in the 60s to low 70s for highs, mainly dry conditions as well. So certainly a little bit of a change, a little bit of a welcome change in a lot of people's estimations, but in any case, getting towards more cooler, drier weather as we get into the next week ahead. Once again, the weather highlights mainly dry for the weekend ahead into early next week. Flooding will gradually start to ease, both river flooding variety and coastal flood variety in the coming days. And marine weather will remain something that we'll be on the lookout for some additional some additional small craft advisory potential as we get into early next week in the wake of our stronger cold front Sunday night into Monday. Otherwise, our small craft advisories for now will drop off this evening. That is it for the week ahead. Thank you for viewing our presentation today, and we'll talk to you later.